back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I am here today to talk to you all about another batch of the SPFBO books that I have been reading as part of the self-published fantasy blog-off. I am one of the judges and I have now read quite a few of the books, so if you've not heard anything about this before, I will link some of the videos below where I've reviewed others in this year's competition, and also I'll put a load of links down there about what the competition is, how you enter, how it's run, all that sort of stuff. So go and check out the links below if you're interested, but if you're here for the reviews, I have 5 more coming your way right now. So let's get started. The first one I want to talk about is the first one in the Magical Arts Academy series, and this is called First Spell, and I picked this one up hoping for a fairly fun, light-hearted read, and I do think that is kind of what I got. This book certainly has a lot of nostalgia in terms of it feels quite similar to many books that came after Harry Potter, and what I mean by that is that there is a concept here where we have 2 young siblings, a boy and a girl, who are sold by their uncle to some stranger that they don't know anything about, and this stranger is supposedly buying them in order to take them away to be trained up in a magical school, and that is the general concept of the book. And along the way, whilst they are trying to get to the magical school, they are attacked by rival sorcerers and different factions, and that is where the conflict comes into the book, because we have 2 different very new characters to our main characters, 2 different sides of an ongoing war or battle, and they kind of don't really know how they fit into it all at the moment. They're kind of unsure what the situation is, politically speaking, and how they can fit in and what magic really is. They don't even know whether magic is something tangible and real at the beginning, and then it turns out later on that actually it is, and they see massive examples of this. So this is a very magical focused book. The characters themselves, I think, are a little bit one-dimensional. Our main character that we're following is called Isadora, and she and her brother Nando are really close to one another. They always help each other out and they look out for each other no matter what the situation is, and they're quite close-knit as a family unit. As the story goes on, we really do focus on Isa's story, and I think they're both fairly young children. They're not particularly old or mature or kind of experienced in the ways of the world, and that comes across a lot in the book. So to me, this felt like it was a book aimed at quite young readers. It felt very simplistic at times and very easy and predictable at times, which is not a bad thing for a young reader, but it definitely didn't have the tension or the atmosphere that many of the other books I've read for this competition have. The other thing I found with this book is that although it does move along at quite a fast pace and we have a lot going on, especially when they are being attacked and things, there is actually a quite distinct lack of development in terms of character and world. It doesn't feel like there's an awful lot of explaining done about this world and how everyone fits into it and what the setup is, or the characters themselves. We don't really get an awful lot of development on them. It's a very short story, a very short book, and it ends on a massively cliffhanger-y moment where I feel like it just never really got going. Lots of mysteries are opened up in this book, but not many of them are resolved, and I found that a little bit irritating as well. So I think for that reason, it was good fun, it was easy, it was light-hearted and enjoyable, but it definitely didn't stand out from the pack, and it didn't have an awful lot of original content that I thought was really, really interesting. So for that reason, I gave this one a 2 out of 5 stars. It's a decent read, it's one I'd recommend for young readers, definitely, but for me as a reader who's read a lot of fantasy, it was quite simple and I didn't love it. So that was that one. The next one I want to talk about is a good story that I enjoyed, and this one follows a main character of a blacksmith, and he has a strange ability right from the start where he can kind of manipulate metals and combine them together to give something quite unique and very special and powerful in this world. He has a way of kind of thinking outside the box and doing something different to a lot of the other inventors in this world, and he's definitely an interesting character, and he is called Avir. I think he's quite a mysterious character at the start. You don't really know an awful lot about his history, but as the book goes on, you kind of learn more about that, and you get to know sort of how he came to be in the position he is, what sort of hardships he's faced, and how he really kind of got into the mindset he is as well, because he's quite a timid character, but then ultimately he is forced to kind of do something very rash and defy the masters who are around him, and in order to do that he has to take some really big steps and This storyline skips through quite a lot of his history, so we're following him throughout many different periods of time. You kind of just settle into one story and you kind of get to know him in that time period. You follow what he's been doing and the situation he's in, and then it skips forward in time and we go a bit further and we see how things have changed and we get into that storyline, and then it skips further again. So although I think it's a really good mechanism for showing you the whole of a life, like it shows you a lot of different periods in this person's life, I also feel like I never quite got fully settled into it all, and I kind of wanted the chance to sit down and just enjoy the story a little bit more than I was given. So the character was good, the ideas were good, and I think the story as a whole was very interesting because we have him as our main character who's mysterious and we don't really know too much about him and we're uncovering it as we go. And then we also have a girl who is another main character, and she again is incredibly mysterious. We don't really know too much about her at first, and again we discover more as we go. So politically speaking, this book had a lot going on. There's a lot of kind of weaving the threads of life and sort of targeting different people in order to get our main character to where he needs to be by the end of the story. And I thought that was definitely interesting to follow, and I think he becomes quite a manipulative character, which in a way is very fascinating and in a way is quite disturbing compared to what he began as. But it's a really, really interesting book and I definitely enjoyed it. So my biggest quibble with this was, as I say, the skipping through time made it a little bit hard to follow at times and maybe didn't give you the room to settle into the story as much as I wanted. I also found it quite hard to actually connect to the character of Avir because he is quite distant at times. He doesn't really reveal too much about how he's feeling or what the situation around him is making him think of. We get moments of it here and there, but I just don't feel like he really connected with me on the same level as some of the other characters I've read about. So although I like the story and him as a character, I didn't connect with him as a character that I related to or that I wanted to sympathise with or anything like that. In the end, I kind of feel like this book is almost a setup book for a series after this. It feels like it could be a standalone, but there is set up for future books as well with different characters as time goes on. And I think it works quite well as that standalone because it jumps through all of these different periods and we are following so many different things. And there is a lot of magic involved in the story, although some of it is questionable and some of it is a bit dark. But I liked it, so I ended up giving this one a 3 out of 5 stars, which is 6 out of 10 for SPFBO, and I definitely thought it was good fun. It is a bit wordy at times, but most fantasy books are. The next one I read is The Crushed Peak, and this one I thought looked really promising from the cover because the cover has all this mountainous landscape and I love that sort of thing. So this story actually starts out following 3 different characters, although 2 of them are much more closely linked than the other one until the very end. So they all kind of converge together ultimately, but for the majority of the book, 2 of the characters are actually together on their journey and one is very separate and we're not quite sure how it all links until the ending. So the characters we're following are Luana, who is a young woman who is basically curse-ridden. She knows she's got this curse on her and she's trying her absolute best to lift this curse, however she has to do that. And the belief at the moment is that she has to go to the Crushed Peak to lift this curse because she has been told to do that by some sort of prophet or something. And so she's journeying there with Ethan, who is a character that she has befriended along the way, and they are going to do their best to get to this peak. However, the peak is very magical. The landscape of this mountain changes constantly, shifts and manipulates, and it confuddles and confuses people who go there. So it is a very treacherous journey and not one that many people take. However, they are determined and they have a strong motivation to do this because they want to lift this curse. And so that's what they do. They journey to the nearest village, find a guide and attempt to conquer the peak and go and find out what's there and how they can lift the curse. The other storyline is a queen character who is called Alice, and she is a character, as I said, quite removed from the other 2. We're not sure how she ties in, whether she's from the past or the future or present. It's not exactly clear at the start of the book. But what you do find out about her is that she is kind of living in a world where there's a lot of warfare on the horizon. Her mother is killed quite early on and she has to step into the leadership role and take over where her mother left off. So she does her best to do this and she ends up marrying a king from the neighbouring kingdom in order to solidify the peace and hopefully stop rivalry between their two different lands. And we kind of follow her from there and see what she is doing and how she's living with this guy who she doesn't really know, in order to try and gain some peace and kind of just put her kingdom first. So that's her storyline. So as I just mentioned, there is a lot to like in terms of the magic in this one. They have magical creatures, some of whom are pretty interesting ones, and there are also lots of magical shifting landscapes and magic on the horizon, which is fun. So in general, this is a very magic focused book, and I like that. In terms of the details of this world, on some of the other books I've been saying it wasn't detailed enough. On this one, I think that kind of shifts the opposite way sometimes. I felt like at times it was a little bit bogged down by just how much information we were being given. It maybe could have been more about the action than it was, and I feel like that would have made it a better story because I would have felt more into it rather than just reading along the words on the page, which is kind of what it felt like at times. So it's a good story, it has a lot of action, but also there are some really long moments which felt a bit tedious. So it was a fine balance, and I guess at times it tipped more one way than the other. This one, I also have to mention, is actually kind of like, it's supposed to be a standalone, so you can start here, but it relies on a previous series a little bit because there are events that have happened in that previous series that you don't know about if you come into this book. And personally, I found that although the author says you can just start here, at first I was a bit confused about starting here. I didn't really get who everyone was or how they knew each other quite. It is explained, but it doesn't go into an awful lot of detail on that point, and I feel like maybe if you're sitting there and saying this one is a standalone and you can just start here, it needs to be a little bit less confusing than it was at first, and you need a bit more background detail in order to kind of really connect early on with the characters, and I don't think this one had that. Another point I had was connection to the characters. Again, my favourite character in this was actually Alice's story, and she's the one who has least of the storyline. She's not featured quite as much. The other two I didn't really care too much about. They were a little bit more irritating to me at times. But in general, I think that they're all interesting characters. I just couldn't connect the same way that I could with Alice with the other two. So there was that. In the end though, I think the action really took off in the second half of the book, and I ended up really enjoying the plot when it got going because it was all quite adventure and action-packed and it felt very fast-paced. So I ended up giving this one a solid 3 out of 5 stars as well, which is 6 out of 10 for SPFBO, and I definitely recommend it if you're interested in a sort of magical shifting landscape that's got a lot of cool elements. Next up, I read Spinning Silk, and this one was one that really surprised me actually because the cover is really dark and ominous and I wasn't sure I was going to like it, but I did. And this one is set in a kind of spin-on Edo period Japan, so it's very much Oriental influence, Asian influence, and it feels like there is a lot to like about the culture in this book. If you are interested in that sort of Asian inspired, Asian flavoured fantasy, then this may be one that you will really, really like. And I certainly found myself quite surprised by how quickly I got into the story for this one because of the culture and because the main character I feel is developed really well in this one. So this character is called Furi, and she's a young girl who grows up in a family where they really don't care about her. She's kind of an adopted child because I think she was abandoned and she was found by this family. They took her in and they raised her, but they don't really like her. She's almost a Cinderella story. She's been taken in and kind of regarded as the slave almost. The only one who's actually nice to her is her adoptive brother Yoshi, but the rest of her family, her mother and father, they are just brutal. Her mother in particular is brutal, and just eventually she sells her to a madam who comes by wanting to get someone who can work silk. And that is one of the few things that Furi is incredibly detailed and talented at. She has a natural affinity for working silk and other materials and weaving, and she is noticed by this madam and she's paid for and purchased by the madam, so she ends up going and living at her house for quite a few years. And this madam is even worse than her mother. She beats her, she's cruel, she's abusive, she's nasty, and she does not care 1 ounce for Furi at all. She is really, really horrible. Furi's life while she is there is not great, and we follow her as she's living in the household and what goes on day to day. And she kind of has only one escape, which is weaving, and that's what she loves to do. And then eventually a young boy joins the household as well, and she is quite interested in this guy. She doesn't really know an awful lot about him or where he came from, and he seems quite mysterious. But it turns out as time goes on, he starts to stick up for her and defend her, and they eventually form a friendship as well. So from that point on, the story kind of focuses more on them, and then he vanishes and her story takes another shift. And I don't want to say any more than that, but it's definitely got some really cool twists. So what I liked about this was Furi's character. She's very developed actually, and you see kind of from her point of view, so you're getting a lot of good insight into her and how she thinks and how she deals with situations, which is really good. I also like the magical aspect of this because there is magic. It doesn't come into the book until sort of later on, and I think it's hinted at the whole way through. There's like a magical presence that's hinted at. Magical things going on that we're not quite sure what it is, but it's really, really fun to read about, and I think the atmosphere was very good in this as well. So the development of the world, the characters, the atmosphere, the magic, it all kind of worked quite well for me. Another thing that I liked a lot about the book is that there are a lot of design elements and a lot of surprises that kind of come out of nowhere, and I like that, to see something a bit different, a bit fresh. There's also a lot of mythology and Asian inspired kind of cultural myths and fairy tales and retellings, which I liked as well being woven into the plot. So on the whole, I think it's a really fun story. I definitely enjoyed my time reading this one, and I think I got sucked into this one far more than most of the others I've read for this competition, so that was good. And I read it really quickly actually. I got through it very fast because I was enjoying it so much, so that's always good. I do think some of the elements of the story are a little bit predictable, especially in the latter half. I think some of the elements they didn't feel that surprising, but equally there were some things that I just didn't see coming, so I guess that works overall. It kind of balances each other out. I ended up giving this one a solid 4 out of 5, which is 8 out of 10 for SPFBO, and I definitely enjoy and recommend this one, so I would be interested in reading more by this author, and I certainly recommend checking her out because she is definitely a good writer. The final one I have to talk to you about in this review is one that I've actually just finished, and it is called The Anointed. And this one I really, really enjoyed actually. It's probably one of my favourites so far in the competition. Well, it definitely is one of my favourites so far in the competition, and I completely got sucked into this story. Now this is, I think, book 3 in a series, but again it is sort of set up as a standalone, so you don't have to have read any of the previous books in order to read this. And I would agree with the author on this point that this one does feel like you can just enter here. You don't need the backstory, you don't need to know an awful lot about what's already gone on, because the characters fill you in on that as the story goes along. So this is set in a world where we have humans and then we have proxies and transfers going on. And humans are basically at a point where if you're rich enough, you can almost become immortal. What I mean by this is that humans have developed a way to transfer someone's span, which is their lifespan. How many years are they going to live if they live out their whole natural life without some sort of disaster killing them? So their lifespan can be transferred from one human into another human if they have a seer with them who can do that and transfer that. They have like magic so they can do it. And these people who give up their lives, or are forced to give up their lives quite often, are called proxies. They are proxied in the system into someone else's body. So it's a bit of a controversial subject in that you are essentially stealing someone else's life cycle and putting it into another body, and it's definitely not always something that is approved by that person. They don't volunteer to be a proxy. Most proxies, in fact, are actually 99-day-old babies, because that is the most potent time to transfer a soul. It means you get a really long life cycle because they're a baby, so they've not used up any of their years, and it also means that they can't protest. It's just how they do it in this world. It's messed up, but it's how they do it. So there's that in the world. We also have dragons in this world, and they are very much present in the story. People fly them everywhere because that is how people travel around this world. You either walk, get a carriage, or you fly a dragon. You cannot in this world sail on a boat, because boats, and in fact nothing, floats in this world. If you fall in water and it's too deep for you to get out, you're gonna die, because nothing floats. Humans don't float, nothing. Nothing floats in this world. With that being said, there is a culture that we follow which is called Peacewood, where they do have floating wood and they have boats and they have a society which is built around the protection of this wood and the protection of these boats. But they don't actually expose themselves to the outside world. It's very isolated. We just follow one main character from there, so we know about it. But the rest of the world has never ever ever and could not ever comprehend the idea of floating boats. It would be crazy to them. So dragons are very much present. They are part of breeding programs. People look after them and care for them as they do pets, and it's very much a big part of the society. This world is cool, I think you guys will admit. Just that concept of transferring spans and the controversy surrounding that. They have different political groups, some of which believe that this is okay, some of which don't. There's a king who is a bit of a horrible guy, to be honest. He's not a very nice one. And he's also a bit mad because he's had like hundreds of transfers and he's got loads and loads of years left to live. And if you get too many, then you can get transfer sickness, which makes you basically insane. You kind of start remembering the lives of the people that you proxied, which is pretty creepy, dark, probably a good punishment, but there are ways to deal with it. But the king has this and he is a bit of a horrible guy. We also follow a particular family, and this family, one of our main characters is called Ketram. He's the father. The other main character that we're following mostly is called Zinless, and he is, again, another main character. He's the son of Ketram. He has a brother and sister as well, who are called, I think, Woram and Ibris, something like that. And they're also viewpoint characters at times, but very much minor viewpoint characters. I would say that Greengrass, who is the character from Peacewood, the society that's isolated that has the floating wood, she's one of our main characters, as is Zinless, as is Ketram, probably. There are like the main three. We also do follow like Ketram's wife, who is very heavily involved in the religious anti-proxy system. They are quite good at campaigning and there's a lot going on with them. The family as a whole are very rich and they are involved in a lot of dragon rearing as well, so they have a lot of dragons on their property. There's also outside forces trying to capture their dragons and free them because they are a religious sect who believe in dragons being free and not being caged. So there's so much in this world, and what I love about this book is that there is so much going on, but it doesn't feel confusing. It feels like even though you switch from character, you have main characters who you're following, and each of the side characters who come in as a plotline, their character, their story, it all makes sense to tie in with the rest of the story. You can tell this author knows what he's doing, I think, because he's obviously written previous books in this world, so he's got a really good sense of this world. It comes across as a very fluid, very developed, very well established world, and I love that. I also think the characters are really, really well developed. There's clearly a backstory to what has happened to them before, which we get hinted at, but you don't need to know it because it's told to you in this story, and you can still really connect with all the characters. And even though one of the main characters, Zinless, is pretty annoying, like he is annoying, he's very self-centered and arrogant, I actually still could understand and enjoy his story and kind of connect with him in a way, because I think everyone has a slight arrogant streak about them, and with the events that have happened in his life I could see why he might get big-headed. And then I also loved Greengrass. I thought her character and story was really, really good. She's very powerful in her own way. She's very rebellious and she stands up for what she believes in, and she does what she needs to kind of just get out of a situation she doesn't like, and I like that. I also like pretty much all the main female characters and male characters were really good. I mean, the bad ones were not good, but they were well developed. So on the whole, it worked really well. I love the addition of dragons. I love the kind of concept of this Peacewood and the way that the people of Peacewood blend with the wood at times. It's a very magical process. There's just so much to like about this, and I don't want to spoil it because I don't want any of you guys not to read it. I think you should. But honestly, it was super, super impressive, especially compared to some of the other books I've been reading, which have been like really good in one area but not so good in another. For me, this one was ticking like all my boxes and it was really, really impressive. So I think I would have to give this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and that would take it up to a 9 out of 10 for SPFBO, which is really, really high. So far, definitely one of my favourites, and I would highly recommend checking this author out. I don't think you have to start with this one. You could start with the previous ones in the series, but this one you can definitely start with without prior knowledge of the series as well. I may end up going back and reading this work in the other books in the series because I'm super intrigued. I want the sequel to this like yesterday, so I'm definitely going to read more by this author, and I'm super keen to go back and sort of find out the backstory too, because everything that was hinted at is really interesting, and I want to know how it all happened and why it all happened. And yeah, it's just really good. And I think when you have a book that you read and it just makes you want to read more in that world and keep kind of finding out what's going to happen next, that's a good sign. So for me, definitely one of my favourites so far, definitely the one I'd recommend most out of all of these, although I think if you guys have heard my review, hopefully you can choose books that you will enjoy maybe more than I did if I've told you what it's about. That's everything for this review. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know which ones you'll be picking up, if any, down below, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.